This morning, we're going to be in Mark chapter 12, and specifically verses 28 to 34. But before we get into the main thrust of the passage, I want to pick up on something that is said in verse 28 that reflects back to the previous verses. It said that one of the teachers of the law noticed that Jesus had given a good answer to those who were questioning him. And I won't get into the subject, but Jesus had told them that they were mistaken in their assumptions, and he said that there were two reasons that they were mistaken. Are you not in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God? And there, right there, we have two of the reasons for all of our doubts, all of our fears, all of our unbelief, and much of our mistaken beliefs. If we needed any more motivation to read our Bibles and spend more time with God, then surely it's here. We can easily bemoan the state of the world today, but after all, what else should we expect from a world system that rejects God? What should trouble us more is to see professing Christians who fail to follow the teachings of Jesus. How many Christians read their Bibles every day? It's a discipline that more often than not goes the way of New Year's resolutions. Let's face it, many a Bible reading plan is run aground on the rocks of Leviticus. But there's a reward promise for those who persevere, and we find it in Jeremiah chapter 29. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. In the passage we're looking at today, we find an honest seeker, and that is rare. That is rare. You can find plenty of opinions and convictions and beliefs on social media, but it's rare to find an honest seeker. To be an honest seeker requires an element of humility because you have to admit there's something that you don't know. Here was a teacher of the law admitting that there was something in the law that he needed advice on. That had to be refreshing for Jesus to hear. The question was, what is the most important commandment? And Jesus' answer had two components, exclusiveness and inclusiveness. These two components are found in verses 29 and 31 and form, if you will, the two outside pieces of the sandwich with the meat in the middle in verse 30. Verse 29 highlights the element of exclusiveness. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Jesus is quoting from Deuteronomy 6 and verse 4. And one of the renderings of this verse when translated is, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And this fact was repeatedly impressed on God's people in the Old Testament, two examples of which are found in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verses 35 and 39. You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Besides him, there is no other. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth below. There is no other. Now, this fact also has two components. Number one, that no other God actually exists. And number two, that no other God must exist in our own minds. Hinduism tells us that there are 330 million gods. This is false. While it's true that there are many demonic forces, there is only one God. On one occasion, while we were working with Operation Mobilization, we were in the city of Durban in South Africa and doing door-to-door outreach in a certain ethnic neighborhood. One lady invited us in and showed us her worship center, which consisted of two bookcases full of about 30 or 40 statues of her gods, one of whom she proudly displayed as Jesus. God will tolerate none of that. But we can also have gods in our own minds. Anything that occupies our thoughts, motivations, and desires above other things can be an object of worship and therefore a god. God demands exclusivity in our worship. Deuteronomy 5 verse 7 says this, you shall have no other gods before me. In the story of the rich young ruler who naively thought that he had kept most, if not all, of the commandments, but it was still aware that something was lacking. Jesus addressed this issue by identifying that his wealth stood between him and God. Before I became a Christian, I had many gods. Some of them were material things and some otherwise. Of course, I didn't recognize them as gods then, but I had no trouble in recognizing them as such afterwards. One was a powerful little sports car that got me into a lot of trouble. But that didn't stop me from idolizing it. I even had a framed picture of it. In the last 40 years, Hazel and I have moved many times, and occasionally I've come across that photograph in the storage boxes, and the thought came to me, well, just stick it up on the wall over the workbench or over the toolbox. But every time a voice came to me and said, don't you hang that picture on your wall. Now that may seem a bit silly, but then again, you shall have no other gods besides me. But there's also one other false god we are in constant danger of worshiping, and that is when in our own minds we make God into something he is not. We don't have the prerogative to pick and choose the qualities and characteristics of God that we want and ignore the rest. But it's easily and understandably done. Who wouldn't want to focus on the first part of God's revelation of himself to Moses in Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7, where it says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. We sing about this all the time, and so we should. But the revelation doesn't stop there. It goes on. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. It is easy to forget that we live in a unique period of human history because it's gone on for the last 2,000 years. It's a period that is defined by the words of Jesus as he began his public ministry. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. We are still in this year of the Lord's favor as the church carries on this ministry that Jesus began. But when Jesus said this, he was quoting from Isaiah 61, and he stopped in the middle of a sentence. The rest of the sentence says, and the day of vengeance of our God. If you want to know what that looks like, you need to turn to the book of Revelation. And if we struggle at all with some of the things that God did in the Old Testament, and I do, then we haven't seen anything until we read the book of Revelation. Jesus said that God looks for those who will worship him in spirit and in truth. And that means accepting all that is included in the holiness of who he is. Now we come to the meat of the sandwich in verse 30. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. I find it a bit interesting that this has been translated, at least in the NIV, without any commas in the sentence. It's almost as though it were emphasizing the fact that this is to be all-encompassing, representative of our entire existence. It's certainly breathtaking in its scope, so much so that it becomes difficult to try and describe. What exactly does this look like? First, I'm going to suggest that the failure to live up to this is, in one sense, by itself the definition of sin, perhaps the standalone definition of sin. Second, in an effort to try and describe it, I'd like us to consider what the opposite of this looks like, what it looks like to not love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Because as Bob Dylan famously wrote, you're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. You can substitute the word love for the word serve in those lyrics because it really equates to the same thing. Now, what does that look like? And the answer is found in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. If we are not loving God as we should, then we are loving one or more of these things to some degree or other. And now I'm going to suggest that this verse 16 divides all sin into one of three distinct categories. Now that's a rather big thesis, but I believe the Bible supports it. First, we'll go to the beginning, which always seems like a good place to start. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. Good for food, lust of the flesh. Pleasing to the eye, lust of the eyes. Desirable for gaining wisdom, the pride of life. Now, obviously, we can dig deeper to develop the theme further, but that's not my intention here today. I just want to highlight that this shows up in a number of significant places in the Bible, not the least of which is the next one. Luke chapter 4, the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Lust of the flesh. The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, "I will give you all their authority and their splendor, for it has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. So if you worship me, it will all be yours." Lust of the eyes. The devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand in the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Pride of life. We could also look at King Solomon. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 16 and 17, God gave Israel the following three guidelines for kings. The king must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Now, what do you suppose Solomon did? In 1 Kings 10 and 11, we learn this. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, lust of the flesh. He filled Jerusalem with silver and gold, lust of the eyes. He accumulated 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which were imported from Egypt, the pride of life. You need to remember, these were not ordinary horses. These were top purebreds. If you want a modern comparison, these were not Toyota Corollas. They were Lamborghinis, Maseratis, and McLarens. If even the wisest man who ever lived fell prey to these three things, then how well do we need to guard our hearts? This, then, is what it looks like to love the world and the things in the world. But we need to be careful when we say this. The Apostle John was not telling us that we cannot enjoy any of the things of this life, and neither did Jesus tell us this. The Bible does not preach asceticism, even though a life of discipleship does require self-denial when there is a conflict between the values of this world and the claims of Jesus upon us. And it is precisely when we exercise the discipline of self-denial, when tempted in these three categories of sin, that we find out what it looks like to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, and all our souls, and all our minds, and all our strength. The great paradox is that we then find ourselves to be the most fulfilled, the most satisfied, and the most content, thereby proving what Jesus said, whoever loses his life for me will find it. The command to love God with our whole being is not a burden that he has laid on us. It is the means of setting us free from the slavery of sin. As C.S. Lewis observed, all that we call human history, money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery, is a long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. Now we come to the other side of the sandwich in Mark chapter 12, verse 31. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. This is the verse that highlights the element of inclusiveness. But first we need to ask why there is a second command included in Jesus' reply. The question was, what is the most important commandment? Singular, not what are the most important commandments. And the implication is that the two cannot be separated from one another. They are complementary commands. One can't stand alone. Again, we're drawn back to the book of 1 John, this time to chapter 4 and verses 20 and 21. If anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And he has given us this command, whoever loves God must love his brother. Anyone can say that they love God, but how would this be shown if it was separated from how we treat others? Of course, this also begs the question that was asked of Jesus on another occasion that we find in Luke chapter 10, and which prompted him to tell the story of the Good Samaritan. On that occasion, he had also been asked about the greatest commandment, and again, both commands were identified, prompting this question, and who is my neighbor? And the story of the Good Samaritan clearly pointed out that no one can be excluded from being our neighbor, including our perceived enemies. And so we have two inseparable commands, one exclusive in nature and one inclusive in nature. But I think we would be negligent if we failed to elevate or emphasize this to the level that Jesus did. Here in Mark 12, Jesus said, there is no commandment greater than these. But in the parallel passage to this found in Matthew 22, Jesus said this, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Wow, that brings it to a whole new level. As I considered that, I couldn't help thinking about something in my last job. I spent 2 years in Singapore working on the construction and commissioning of an FPSO for use in Guyana. An FPSO just stands for Floating Production, Storage, and Offloading Facility. Basically, a large ship designed to produce and process subsea oil. More than 15 modules were built in Singapore and in China, and eventually lifted by heavy lift vessels to be put on the FPSO in Singapore. Each of these multi-level modules filled with equipment was the size of a small city block, and some weighed between 3,000 and 4,000 metric tons. I won't forget watching each module being suspended from the four corners and swung up and put into position and lowered down on the ship. A whole city block suspended from 4 points. Failure of either one of those points would have spelled disaster. Jesus said that all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. For us, that's the equivalent of saying that all 66 books of the Bible stand on these two pressure points. Back in Mark 12, the response of the honest seeker showed that his heart was in the right place. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices.